What are glassings? Glassings are the most common category of what you might call fist loading. Somebody takes something hand size, puts it in their hand in order to throw a more powerful punch. So they're not just throwing their hand at you, they're throwing their hand with something in it. Statistically, the most common object will be a glass or a bottle, usually a beer bottle. They're all over restaurants, bars. Personally, I've seen cue balls used, billiard balls. There's the same idea. The guy gets enraged, he grabs the closest, heaviest thing he can find, like a billiard ball, and he uses it to make the force of his blow stronger and cause more damage. Now, why do you need this kind of training? Because unlike what you see in movies and television, you are statistically most likely to be hit by a common object like this. Not a samurai sword, not a K-bar that the Marine Corps commando is carrying, but something that is everywhere in your restaurants and your bars. Let's review some concepts about the flinch reflex. Flinching is a natural, hardwired occurrence. It's a defensive mechanism that's hardwired into your brain. That means you're not going to be able to turn it off, and it happens when a stimulus is introduced into your field of vision too quickly, and there's nothing you can do about it. There's been a lot of research done on flinching in the last few years. Some of it's very good, but I want to simplify the idea and make it a lot easier to understand. From my point of view, basically there's two kinds of flinches. One is very useful for self-defense, and one is very counterproductive. It's going to make the attack worse. And this is the kind of flinch that most people have happen to them when they're being attacked up close like this in something quick like a punch. Now the problem is the first flinch that we're talking about is probably related to a blink reflex. So when a stimulus is introduced, this kind of action happens. Your head turns away, your chin comes up, you tend to reach, and you're going to probably try to move backwards. All the things you must not do if somebody tries to punch you, or worse yet, hit you upside the head with a beer bottle. Now the other kind of flinch is the kind that happens when there's a more unknown stimulus, usually a loud sound. Something like this happens. The person's weight naturally drops, their chin comes down, their shoulders come up, and their hands come up in this kind of guarding fashion. Now, there's no real way to tell which one you're going to do. Your brain interprets stimulus in different ways, but through training, I think you can cultivate this. By cultivating, I mean make it more of a habit for your body and your brain to do one as opposed to the other. We definitely cannot have this kind of blink reflex. You're going to get hit, and all the ideas of how to block punches break down because you're going to have a flinch. Which kind of flinch can largely be determined by the kind of training you do. All right, we've talked about the idea that in many real-world self-defense weapon attacks, the person doesn't realize he's being attacked with a weapon until after. Combining that with the idea that you're going to have a flinch reflex, whether you like it or not, depending on how quickly he moves and how much distance between you. Having more time to be able to see with your visual field what he's doing tends to reduce the flinch reflex. So as we go through longer and larger weapons, the flinch reflex will be less and less of a factor. But in close range fighting here, when we're talking about the speed of his arm, like it or not, you're going to flinch. Coupled with the idea that you may not know what's in his hand, you're going to have to treat this like a punch. Remember, the trajectory of his arm, whether he's going to hit you with his hand, he's going to hit you with a bottle, even the slashing action of a knife is basically moving in the same trajectory. That means you can respond to it in the same way. Let's take a look. So when he winds up to hit me and I get my flinch response, I'm going to cover my head in the same way and enter. If I have an idea, maybe I saw him pick up the bottle in the corner of my eye and he's coming down in more of a hammering motion, I may be able to contour my shell to try to get a more of a sliding effect and make sure I'm covered on this side. But we can basically treat this the same way as the punch. So as he swings, I have to jam that attack, and you can see how naturally my arm is going to end up overhooking this. Now, many times he wants to use this weapon on me. His natural reflex is going to be to try to pull this arm out. At this point, that's the chance to give him a combat Osoki Garrett that's going to smash his head on the ground. Now there's different ways to do this. We're going to do the street or combat osotogeri, which is just an outside hook flip. That's the Japanese term that we use in judo and jiu-jitsu. This is very, very dangerous. You can smash the guy's head, and if you have a hard surface, man, you're approaching lethal force here. Now this kind of throw is harder than any punch you're ever going to throw or any kick. It is devastating if you're able to do it right. Now, like we talked about earlier in our unarmed self-defense, throws are a skill in themselves. You may or may not have the time to learn the whole throwing repertoire that's in judo and jiu-jitsu. But this basic one, the osotogeri, is really, really simple compared to the other ones and really, really powerful. I was taught a version of it in almost every martial art I've done, and it's really, really effective. The basic idea here is, especially if he's bigger than me, I can't force the throw. He has to give it to me. By that I mean he's traveling the direction that I need him to be traveling in. When he tries to pull this away, number one, I gotta clamp it in there so it's not coming out, and as he pulls, I gotta push on with my body. Stand up. Okay? Now, if I get chest to chest with him, he's not going to be able to recover his balance, and I start forcing him backwards. The key is my outside leg. I need to step parallel with his or a little bit past. Now, to get the most violent version of this, my hand's going to go to his chin. It could even go to his eye and his chin. But I want to rock his head over the leg I'm going to kick out. I make sure that my chest is connected with his, contoured with his. And I look down slightly, but I'm not hunching. As I begin to push him here, I don't just trip him by putting my leg here. I kick the leg out and I smash his head as we land. Bang. All right, we looked at how to jam that attack, which you're probably going to have to do because of the flinch reflex. When he winds up to attack, I need to move in as quickly as possible. He's going to try and pull that arm away. My elbow can drop over it if I'm close enough at the right angle. Sometimes your elbow's going to be below the arm. He tries to pull his arm back, and I'm going to have to use my fist here and wrap over top, okay? Now, after I throw the guy, it's usually going to be a really hard takedown. But sometimes you're on grass, whatever, you don't execute the throw right away. You could probably follow up with some simple arm locks. Let's take a look. Now remember, the most brutal version of this throw is to use it to crack his head. I want to get his weight over the leg. I kick it out, but it didn't go 100%, and there's still some fight left in him. There's the classic way that we were taught in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu to put a elbow lock here, but you see how his arm is bending already? There's a preferred version, but let's assume that I'm able to keep this arm locked out. I put pressure on his deltoid muscle here. I got to get behind his elbow joint, and by putting my hips behind here, I can get a pretty good lock. That'll make him let go. But a lot of the time this arm bends, and if that happens, bend your elbow, I'm going to step over here. Here's a less common lock. I very seldom see this, if at all, in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I see it a little bit in combat sambo. For street conditions, I really prefer this. I don't have to lay back in the cross arm lock position. And as far as putting pain on the guy, literally, I can dial up how much force I want to put because I've got a crank on his shoulder. I can go 1 degree, 2 degrees, 3 degrees, and really control the force a lot more than with the elbow lock. The trick here is to pull him up straight. You see I'm popping my hips into his shoulder, and then by turning my left shoulder, I can crank this thing right off. That's a nice shoulder version that I think is better for this kind of position. Again, if you're a peace officer, you could even do this one-handed sometime and be able to get your cuffs out, things like that. This is a really good control position that I like more than the traditional elbow lock that we do a lot in BJJ from that position. Let's look at an alternative way to control the guy instead of putting him on the ground. Putting him on the ground gives you lots of advantages. When you're training in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, you're going to have lots of ways to do that. But in the real world, there are a lot of urban environments where the space or the floor makes you not want to put them in there. Especially if you're in a crowded bar or club scene, you may want to be able to both stay standing, but have some of the advantages of putting them on the ground. The middle ground there is to use a vertical surface, a wall. It can give you a lot of the same advantages as you get by putting a guy on the ground, i.e. he's sandwiched between a hard surface and my body weight. Gravity isn't acting on you the same way, so it's not a complete equivalent, but it can be very, very helpful. Now, when we were doing the unarmed self-defense, we talked about the 5 swords. when we did the punch defense, how I can defend against his 5 primary weapons. When we're talking about a weapon defense, when he's got a weapon in his hand, it's even more imperative I control him. I can't let him jerk that hand away and start going to work again, particularly if he's got an edge weapon, which needs very little space to operate it. Now in this context, he's got an impact weapon, he's trying to glass me, but the idea is the same. I'm going to use this overhook the same way, which was our first sword. I want to avoid getting hit in the head or bitten, so that's his second sword. I want to step in to avoid a kick with his third one. He's going to try and hit me with his hand, so I'm always monitoring here, trying to get here or at the wrist. In this case, he's got a jacket on, a grab like this, or remember, just because this is illegal in tournament jiu-jitsu doesn't mean it's not a great grip for the street. Putting your fingers inside a tight sleeve can be better than trying to grip it on top. Depends what he's wearing. Okay, now the key thing here is I've got pretty good control of him, but if he's much bigger than me and I'm having a hard time and I don't want that weapon coming up, I can use this vertical surface. I'm going to jam his hip into the wall and I'm going to use my head to put his head into the wall. Can you see how I've got him stuck here like a bug stuck on the windshield? It makes it really hard for the guy to move, and I haven't had to learn another control theory. Why is it hard? Because his body mass is built around his spine. And his spine has 2 ends, his hips and his head. These things are dangerous because they're holding the weapon. But if I jam his head into the wall and I jam his hip, he's not going anywhere. Push out hard. I can just jam him in here. And if I create a little space, I can actually headbutt him really viciously here because his head is against the wall. Now, another alternative, if he has this kind of sleeve on, is look at this. Now I've got a 2-in-1. I control his head here, and I've got the free arm here. What do you think of that? I can jam on him, I can headbutt him, and I can hurt him badly here because now my weight is stable, my balance is stable. That's the time to use strikes, not when you're having your weight shifting from leg to leg. All right, now for drilling, it's pretty low tech and pretty simple. Basically, if you're drilling your punch, you're drilling your glassing. So you don't even need an article. In fact, it makes it a lot safer than trying to find something you can actually hit each other with. Remember, the basic idea of somebody hitting you with a fist load or punching you, the angle is primarily the same. So all we need is to start slapping at each other. That could very well be a glass, and I throw at him. Good. Now a good way to drill this is he throws at me, and I block and enter. I throw at him, he blocks and enter. Then every once in a while, he's going to yell glass.
Glass.
Now the only difference is I enter more against the arm. I'm not so concerned about tying up his body. I want to make sure I tie up his arm. That's really the only difference between entering against the glassing and entering against a punch. Sometimes you still get that flinch reflex, but you still see him pick up that glass and you go into the arm to make sure that you cut it off. At this moment, I'm not so concerned about the takedown. I may not even want it. I may be able to disengage from here, but I want to make sure he doesn't get a second chance to hit me with the glass. In the case of a punch, I may just want to tie up his body to have more control of him and more options, and I'm not so concerned about his arm. That's the main difference between the two. So your drilling is really simple. You don't even need a fake weapon. It's a lot of fun. Just hit each other back and forth, and we'll see you in the next lesson.